The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end. And this is evident from their acting always or nearly always in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously, but designedly, do they achieve their end. Now whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists, by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. In the history of philosophical arguments attempting to establish the existence of God, we often come across those that are termed teleological. Teleological means that they appeal to the appearance of purpose in the world as evidence of God's existence. In this video, we will be looking at the best of them, the teleological argument of Thomas Aquinas. We want to achieve two things. First, to separate it from other teleological arguments that are often mistakenly considered analogous to it. And second, to clarify the argument in order to free it from common misinterpretations so that it can be evaluated in its proper form. Let's try to make this analysis as simple as possible. We'll take it line by line. Step 1. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. This is a simple statement about what the argument is intended to establish, that the world is governed. Step 2. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end, and this is evident from their acting always or nearly always in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. It is evident that we are looking at the things of the world that lack an intellect. For Thomas, that is everything that is not a human. To this we can include inanimate matter such as rocks and planets, but also animate matter such as trees and non-human animals. Thomas is saying that all of these things act for an end, and we can observe this because given a specific set of circumstances, they act always or nearly always in the same way. This part seems reasonable, given that we base the scientific method on the idea that things in the world are predictable and verifiable by way of observation and experimentation. This claim about acting towards ends has its objections, but they are common to the other ways that I have covered in earlier videos, so I will not repeat them here. It is the next part of the premise that is more controversial, that they act so as to obtain the best result. This is what the nearly always act properly alludes to. We know that there are individual instances where things do not act in their best interests, and Thomas accepts this. For example, if the environment changes, certain species will die off because they continue to act in a way that does not favour their best interests in the new environment. However, it may be that this is the very point that Thomas is making. There is a sense in which we can say that for an order to be any sort of order at all, it must naturally be beneficial. If we take the example of a bird, if it were in the order of birds to not flap their wings when they jump from the tree, they would fall to their death. Thus, not only would we have no birds, but we would have no such order. So I believe that this way of thinking captures the first premise in a way that Thomas had intended. So we could reformulate: non-intelligent things act according to an order, and for that order to be maintained it must be beneficial. And in this form it seems relatively straightforward. Anyone denying it is probably opening themselves up to more problems than solutions. But it is the next line that is an addendum to the first premise that introduces the real controversy. Thomas says, "Hence it is plain that not fortuitously but designedly do they achieve their end." Understanding this claim is key to understanding the argument. If you misinterpret this, which is easy to do, you may be in good company, but you will miss Thomas's point entirely. He is not arguing for intelligent design here. In other words, he is not saying that there is an intellect that intervenes in the creation of each substance and designs it to do what it does. This is the mistake made by Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion, and it is obvious from what Dawkins says that he does make this error, for he says, "The young Darwin was impressed by it when, as a Cambridge undergraduate, he'd read it in William Perry's Natural Theology." But Paley's argument and Thomas's argument are not analogous, For Paley posits a view of a mechanistic world carefully designed like a watch that can only be explained with reference to an intelligent designer. The refutation to this, then, can take the form the world is not actually designed in this way. Darwin's evolution by natural selection explains why it looks like design. The problem is that Thomas's design argument is not a design argument at all. In fact, he does not actually use the term design in his argument. Instead, he relies on the Aristotelian concept of purpose. He says that things move ex intentione, that is, with intention or with purpose. Those of an Aristotelian persuasion know what this means, and it is important for us to know what it means. For Aristotle, the physical world contains substances that consist of matter and form. There is this concept known as hylomorphism that was defined in our video on the first way. It allows Aristotle to explain how things change over time. An important part of this explanation involves the concept of actuality and potentiality. Matter is potential. It can become different things. Marble has the potential to become a statue of David, for example. What makes it actually the statue of David is the form that the marble takes. Therefore, the form is its actuality. Thomas adopts this Aristotelian concept of hylomorphism and applies it here. He says that things that lack intelligence act for an end. In other words, their form determines that they will behave in such a way that is consistent with their form. What he's really saying is that everything has a nature. It is in the nature of a thing for it to do whatever it does. A tree, for example, will have its roots in the ground and the leaves in the air. You will not find a tree that grows the opposite way, and it's its nature or its form that determines that. And it is just as well, because if the tree had its roots in the air and the leaves in the ground, it would die. And I do not think that Richard Dawkins or Charles Darwin would disagree. Everything has a nature that determines the way it will act. Furthermore, I do not think they could disagree that the nature of things is such that they are directed towards their optimum end. That is consistent with what they call natural selection. So, this clause adds little to what we established earlier when it is read. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously but with purpose, owing to the form, do they achieve their end. This means that we do not actually encounter the need to appeal to an intellect until we come to the second premise. Now, whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Given what we have already said, this premise must be considered the more controversial, for it is plain what Thomas is claiming here. If a non-intellectual substance is directed towards an end, it must be guided by an intellectual substance. The problem is that in presenting the argument, he gives no reason why this must be so. He uses the example of how an archer guides the arrow toward the target. If the archer does not, the arrow will not move there on its own. In fact, it is more than that. It is not just that the archer guides the arrow towards its target. It's that the archer gives the arrow a purpose when they do. The way that in manufacturing pens we give the elements that are combined to make the pen the purpose of writing. If we do not give the pen or the arrow a purpose, they have none. However, Thomas's example is not quite analogous for the same reason. Trees and rocks and insects are not given their purpose by humans, and neither are the elements that are used to manufacture the arrow or the pen. They have their nature independently of human activity, so the arrow and the tree are different in a way, because the arrow does not have a nature, while the tree does. And humans do not give the arrow a nature by sending it towards its target. The nature contained in the arrow comes from the elements that are used to make it, and these the human depends upon when they design it for its purpose. Even so, this helps to clarify Thomas's point in the second premise of the fifth way. For something to have a nature, the nature must be instilled in that thing by an intellect, and it is not instilled by the human intellect. Whatever assigns a nature must be different from the human intellect. This, Thomas concludes, is God. God infuses nature, and therefore purpose, into the world. As he puts it, therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God.